The non-belief is incoherent omnibus. Number 9. The argument from Sagan's standard. Premise 1. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. This is known as Sagan's standard. If it is not taken axiomatically, then one is faced with the possibility of accepting untrue propositions on insufficient evidence, or committing special pleadings by accepting propositions with varying standards of evidence. Premise 2. What makes a claim extraordinary is the abundance of available contradictory evidence. Hume precisely defined an extraordinary claim as one that is directly contradicted by a massive amount of existing evidence. For a claim to qualify as extraordinary, there must be overwhelming empirical data of the exact antithesis. Premise 3. As private mental events, belief claims are inherently untestable. Because we cannot subject beliefs to direct empirical observation, we cannot test them either. Premise 4. Belief can be held without conscious awareness. The vast majority of human cognition does not rise to the level of conscious awareness. Conclusion. Therefore, an absence of belief, even if true, is unknowable. Conclusion 2. Therefore, the claim to know that a given belief is absent is an extraordinary claim that requires extraordinary evidence. While arguments, analogies, and assertions have been offered for an absence of belief, as distinct from belief to the negation, being in that state, and the capacity to be aware of the content of the subconscious, no empirical evidence has been presented for these. We only have the fallible self-report of subjects who express their subjective experience of their alleged absence of belief. Self-reports that under other circumstances would be dismissed for a variety of reasons. They should be dismissed here as well because they preclude the possibility of the presence of a subconsciously held belief that needn't be logical because it was involuntarily formed by a variety of other factors beyond evidence and reason, including, but not limited to, beliefs, biases, other cognitive factors, cultural influences, emotions, personal experiences, pre-existing beliefs, and social pressures, and such a preclusion is unjustified. The argument that one is the expert of their own mind is actually a psychologist's fallacy.
The argument under consideration is a bit strange. The logical structure of the argument isn't clear, and the inferences are not easily discernible. This hampers the reader's ability to understand and accept the argument. One premise is stated but never applied to a conclusion. This seems to be a rhetorical strategy rather than a support for the argument's provisional or final conclusion. The argument attempts to invoke Sagan's aphorism to bridge an extraordinary leap of logic. Instead of looking at the first premise, let's jump to the third premise and see how the case is built towards the first conclusion. Premise 3 states, as private mental events, belief claims are inherently untestable. Belief claims are publicly asserted statements which are in fact observable. The belief itself may be a private mental event and not directly observable. But a belief can be indirectly inferred from behavior and the stated belief claims themselves. Behavioral analysis, as presented by the two citations, Moore and Herbert, treats these private events as behavioral phenomena rather than mental phenomena. They don't initiate behavior, but are instead caused by antecedent conditions and are followed by subsequent behavior. In this model, private events are not mental phenomena manifesting from a mystical realm of Platonic ideals, rather they are entirely behavioral, subject to antecedent conditions, absolutely observable and testable. Since belief claims are public, observable, and analyzable through behavior, premise 3 is false on both counts. Premise 4 asserts that beliefs can exist without conscious awareness. However, this does not support the implication that such beliefs are unknowable or impossible to access. The very sources cited to support this premise contradict that assumption. Ward, in Outsmart Self-Sabotage, 5 Steps to Change Subconscious Beliefs, instructs the reader to identify and modify core beliefs the reader may not yet be aware through introspection. Some beliefs may be subconscious, but that doesn't mean all unconscious beliefs are unknowable or that we cannot become aware of them through introspection, reflection, or behavioral analysis. Premise 4 does not establish this much stronger claim, which is the inference required by the first conclusion. The conclusion, an absence of belief, even if true, is unknowable, can be dismissed because premise 3 fails and premise 4 lacks the necessary inference to justify it. Even if the premises did support the conclusion, the author is selectively prejudiced against an absence of belief when the reasoning would apply equally to any belief, or disbelief. Understand what this conclusion is, and what it is not. What it is: a claim built on faulty premises that only appear convincing due to the presence of multiple references. The conclusion itself is not supported by any direct evidence whatsoever. If this were the case, the author could have just presented such evidence, and a premise that states as such. The conclusion presented here cannot be used as an antithesis counter to an extraordinary claim. In other words, it does not serve as a valid counterbalance requiring extraordinary evidence to be overturned. Now let's look at the first premise: extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. While this aphorism seems reasonable and rational, by presenting this premise as an axiom, the author imposes a principle that implies a compelling force to accept rather than justifying itself. Axioms are accepted within a particular logical system, not individually adopted. Special pleading only occurs when unjustified exceptions are made. When considering a proposition, we have no access to the truth value of the proposition. Available evidence should lead us to accept a proposition as more likely true if sufficient. What can be believed about a proposition does not necessarily reflect, much less, determine its actual truth value. Let's dive into what an claim is in the extraordinary sense, and what is evidence in the extraordinary sense. The aphorism was popularized by now deceased astronomer Carl Sagan. Now, he does not define what extraordinary evidence would be, making it difficult to set an objective standard from Sagan alone. He discussed an extraordinary claim in the context of paranormal phenomena, such as alien visitation of Earth or astral projection, but again, doesn't set a hard standard. The aphorism seems to be used more as a rhetorical device in popular culture than a standard in scientific academia. Sagan, by his reputation, is a great science communicator, but he didn't define what a claim or evidence would be in an extraordinary sense. Looking towards Hume, we may find his idea of a miracle to be an extraordinary claim. Hume clearly defines a miracle to be a violation of the laws of nature. The laws of nature, which he uses to describe the natural world, is established by a wealth of prior experience. Extraordinary evidence, in this sense, isn't a special kind of evidence, just a wealth of experience and observation. According to the laws of nature, a piece of silver dropped from a height will hit the ground. Hume's prior experience would preclude him from accepting that a piece of silver instead hung suspended for a good 20 minutes before flying into the air. Note, it would not be impossible to accept the claim, but that it would require a thorough investigation with a wealth of evidence to explain this phenomenon. Hume's key argument is that when evaluating a claim, one must weigh the probability of the claim against the entirety of past experience. If a claim contradicts all past observations, then the evidence for it must be even stronger than the weight of that prior experience. The stronger the claim, the stronger the necessary evidence to support that claim. The reason I analyze the aphorism in detail here, even though the author defines their usage in premise 2, is that premise 2 is never actually used in the argument. The author never supplies contradictory evidence to support the antithesis. And so, never applies premise 2 to either conclusion. The author does not meet the burden of proof they placed on themselves with this premise. The second conclusion states, therefore, the claim to know that a given belief is absent is an extraordinary claim that requires extraordinary evidence. This conclusion is built on the first conclusion, which fails based on its premises. Premise 3 claims that belief claims are untestable, but belief claims are public assertions that can be analyzed through behavior and psychological methods. Premise 4 only states that beliefs can exist unconsciously, but it does not establish the much stronger claim that such beliefs are unknowable. Since the first conclusion fails, the second does as well. An extraordinary claim, per Hume, contradicts an overwhelming amount of prior evidence. However, the argument does not provide overwhelming evidence against people knowing their own beliefs. If knowing one's own beliefs were extraordinary, then all self-awareness would be extraordinary, which contradicts common experience. In reality, people regularly identify and reflect on their beliefs through introspection, discussion, and behavioral analysis. To counter one point, while self-reports are fallible, they are not the only source of belief assessment, nor are they uniquely unreliable. Psychological research employs implicit association tests, reaction time studies, physiological measurements, and good old behavioral observation, all of which can reveal implicit or subconscious beliefs. All empirical methods including perception, memory, and even scientific observation are subject to error. Science and rational inquiry function by accumulating evidence, adjusting for error, and refining conclusions. In summary, the burden of proof rests on the author to demonstrate that self-knowledge of belief is so improbable that it meets the standard of an extraordinary claim, which they have not done.